Thank you. So we're calling together the meeting of the transportation, I'm going to forget what our group is, Transportation Review Committee, at any rate, looking at all of our transportation committees. So I'm going to start by saying it's good to see you guys. It's been a while since we last got together, but you know, we had done some I had done some editing and then did more editing, and then Karis came back. So we finally found a date when we could get together. We had agreed we were going to meet after town meeting, and all that has sort of put us on a path that got us to tonight, after Karis and Kate then had a chance to go in and do a little bit more editing and beating everything into the proper format. So you now see charges that are properly formatted. I think for the most part, it looked to me like we carried through what I had given to Karis and Kate. Part of what I said is that, and I don't remember if I wrote this to everybody or if I just talked to groups about it. There were some items, I talked to Justin definitely, there were some items that were in the Transportation Safety Committee charge that really were strongly of a nature reflective of policy. And I pulled those out because in fact, those will be taken up by the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee, right? So the larger committee is the one that will hold the policy questions to advise the select boards on those for the most part. And then I also flagged for the group the question there that were the open issues with how the committee would hope to be supported by the department. And maybe that's something that Karis could talk to. I know that when I originally read it, the question that related to sidewalks is something that I know has been being developed so that we have a good sidewalk inventory that can be a resource for people. But let me let Karis speak, I guess.
Sorry, Marianne, are you looking for more of a perspective on what we should be doing with the sidewalks, or?
No. So the committee was just looking to have support from the department for things like getting the agenda packets out. You know, there was that list of characteristics that was in the initial submission, and they really are things that don't feel like they belong in a charge. So print and prepare GIS maps, traffic analysis, prepare status reports of existing projects, technical support for hybrid meetings, produce minutes, and then an inventory of existing sidewalk maintenance and new sidewalk construction. And those had disappeared from the charge. And I know the question from the Transportation Safety Committee is, or will be, where do those end up and how do those things get covered?
So I think, if I'm envisioning why it may have been taken out, that's just part of the charge of the Public Works Department to begin with. And so we would provide that information as a matter of practice anyways to the select board or any of the other boards. So it would serve the same as we would provide similar information to the planning board, for example, like when somebody has a project proposed. So I think that sort of my understanding as to why it didn't necessarily make sense to be in the charge, but was still a responsibility that would be put on Public Works.
Okay, and so that was my presumption too, was all along was that Public Works would be supporting the committee with those pieces that were needed to do their work. Okay, David?
Yeah, I don't think we made similar requests in our documents, but the questions are certainly relevant to any of the committees about what kind of support there might be. And, you know, it's hard to, I don't want this to be the tail that wags the dog, because I'm not really clear yet on what all the other committee would undertake on a regular basis. But to the extent that it undertakes more than the Transportation Committee historically took, I think we made it clear that we think some additional staff support might be necessary.
So I do think that's understood, that we're going to have to do that appropriately. And I know that's something that Karis is trying to think through and figure out how we do it appropriately. But I also think that we've identified that transportation is one of our highest priorities. And we know it's one of our biggest stumbling blocks for things in the town. And it is work that we're going to need to undertake for sure. Do other people have questions? Otherwise, there was one other question that I had just reached out to Karis as a reminder on. That was something that we talked about when Kate and Karis and I met. But I don't know if all of you have really had a chance. I know that I did go through kind of line by line, looking back and forth between two different versions to see that all the critical points that each of you had included made it to the next charge. Duncan.
Yeah, David was kind enough to phone me not so terribly long ago to acquaint me with the fact that I had those documents in my email, and I did go through them, and we did talk a little bit. We had a few kind of very minor sort of tweaks in usage. I did go, after we talked, David, so far as to put them in the form of an edit to the charge for our committee, and I'm happy to either send that to you or distribute it or even just do it live. There's just a couple of minor points that I think might clear up a couple of things and make things easier for possibly for other committees. I'm open to any various possible ways of discussing or presenting that.
Do you want to try telling us what the changes are that you would like to recommend?
Sure, yeah. This is really getting into the body of the planning committee's report, there might be analogous changes that in the other committees that one might want to consider. But what I had was, let me get it back up. Okay. And the first thing was the second bullet point under composition, and there are two current representatives. So I think that what Dave and I thought about was changing that to read one of the two current representatives, plural, to the MAPC.
I believe that's still the case, that we belong to two separate subregions. And so Mo Handel has represented us to the Trick subregion, and Alex Klee has represented us to the Inner Core. And so we thought the quickest fix would just be to say one of the two current members. But you could, if you wanted both of them, you could say both of them, but we were just trying to make sure it's clear.
Yep, I appreciate that. I think that's a good correction. Yep.
Great. Okay. The other thing was this is a paragraph that again, Dave and I talked about, and I've actually gone so far as to try to do a little bit of surge around. Under the charge, the MPCC committee shall, or will rather, we have that paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th bullet point, participate in meetings. And what struck me after Dave and I talked is that the way that's phrased, it almost creates something called a joint transportation committee, which of course isn't really a legally constituted entity. And I tried reworking that in a way to just say participate in semi-annual joint meetings, parens JMs, along with all other transportation related committees. The purpose of the JMs is to align activities, properties, blah, 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 yada, yada. And then the semi-annual meetings will occur in September and February of each year. So this doesn't sort of create a shadow giant committee in a formal sense. It just says that there will be a joint meeting of the committees. And it struck me, and then, the next last bullet that would get changed to as far as the frequency of the meetings is concerned, the committee will meet at least semi-annually at the JMs and more often as needed.
So I think
so
we'll
I think
take that one under advisement.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, and that's what I wanted to air. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, or is that?
I'll just piggyback a little bit on that comment about how often we meet. Or the planning committee would meet. The implication from what I read there was sort of an expectation they would meet for the JMs, and not necessarily much more than that. And I'm not sure if that was the intention.
No, so the intention was not to specify and commit you to a meeting schedule, but that you could set a meeting schedule that was appropriate for your work.
Yeah.
Which is why the as needed. So I think
Yeah.
there's a presumption that if in fact you're providing oversight of the development of, mobility plan for the town, a master plan, that then you will set a work meeting schedule that's appropriate to that work. So
Great.
that's what we were trying not to overcommit you.
Right.
But the goal is not to tell you that you're not meeting. So
Okay.
you think that does that sound appropriate? I mean, which is why the language was as needed, and it really seemed to us that the work may vary in any given year with what the priority items were to do.
Yeah, I think it works pretty well, although I was just concerned that if we were trying to argue that we really need some extra support for the work we're doing, and then somebody comes back and says, well, all you have to do is, annually is attend these meetings. You don't have that much you have to do. I didn't want that to be sort of, I want to be supported when we're asked to do stuff. If we're asked to do stuff, that's.
Yep. Okay. Dimitri.
Yeah, this is also kind of continuing what Duncan said. When I read through the Rail Trail Advisory Committee charge, I didn't formulate a revision, but I had the same reaction as Duncan did about that joint transportation committee's language, which it just confused me. To be honest, it's like what is the what is this committee? Committees that so whatever change you make, if you make a change to the other one, it should propagate to that fifth bullet point on the rail trail one as well. Everything else on the rail trail one, I think, is great.
So I think in the end, the language was the same in all three charges. So a change to one will necessitate a change to all three, because the goal is to keep that language consistent.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of highlight that I also had a confused reaction to that language.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No, the intent is not to create a super committee, but that it be a joint meeting of the committees. So, Keith.
Thanks, Marianne. I won't waste too much time on a positive comment feedback here, but I think this is an awesome change, and just especially coming from being a layman, not a bunch of experience in transportation. I see a lot of huge improvements here, and I just want to commend you. All that worked on this. I really do think it's going to set the town up for success for transportation in the future. So I think it's a great job.
Thank you. Well, certainly our goal is to get to something that is successful and that takes advantage of the good talents that we have in an area where we definitely need to bring skills to the table. So I'm grateful for all of you for work to help us there, and more importantly, to get us through the next stage, which is some significant planning for the future. Kevin.
Thanks, Marianne. Just to David and Dimitri's point, would there be any wisdom in just breaking up an extra bullet point saying the committee will meet as their schedule requires or needs, and then another one, they will meet semi-annual, just to articulate it all around?
So I think we can look at trying to figure out how we make sure that all of those things are clear.
Yeah.
That the committee should set a work schedule that's appropriate for their work. Okay. But I was going to say, definitely, I was not looking to overcommit people to a meeting schedule, or to a schedule that might be monthly when it might be more appropriate, every 6 weeks. I don't know what.
Oh, right. Yeah. As needed.
So, yeah. Okay. Alrighty.
I mean,
Dimitri.
yeah, just, I mean, the fix to that language about the joint committees could be I mean, if you just say joint meet, instead of capitalizing joint, you
Correct.
make it lowercase and then say joint meeting of the transportation committees, parentheses, which include, and then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've taken cut of all that, and I
Yeah.
sent it to Mary Ann, and
Yeah.
I think we'll be okay.
All right.
Yeah, and I agree. That's what it was about. Yeah.
David.
Yeah. This is the lawyer in me who drafts bylaws and stuff, but if you're using the charge language, I assume that would eventually could appear in other places. I don't know if it will appear in bylaws, but my instinct tells me on the Rail Trail Advisory Committee, you might want to define the trail. There's a shorthand using reference to the trail somewhere once or twice in there. And at the beginning, you talk about the Bay Colony Trail, and you might just want to say the trail, capital T trail. Maybe it doesn't matter if it's all internal within the select board and it's not going to be referred elsewhere in bylaws and stuff, then it's less important, but that's my suggestion.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good suggestion. I wouldn't, these will not go into bylaws. Part of the challenge, so, I think back to my time even on the Wellesley board, and the over a decade ago, Ropes and Gray said to me, you've got to get all these committees out of your bylaws. And the reason is that you want to be able to make charges that you can change without having to go to town meeting to ask a change, which is sort of the position that we're in on the transportation committee right now.
Yeah.
So these are not expected to go back into the bylaws. They are committees that will be advisory to the select board. So they are committees that will be evaluated as part of that process on an ongoing basis.
Well, another nomenclature issue I've heard, I think in this call and elsewhere, you've occasionally mentioned that called it the Traffic Safety Committee, and then elsewhere it's the Transportation Safety Committee. So we just need to be consistent, whatever it is.
It should be Transportation Safety. Thank you.
Okay.
And you know what? I'm going to say none of these committee names are really cast in stone. So if people had strong feelings some other way tonight, but they were the names that we sort of settled on and tried to use consistently. And you're right, I need to get the right words in my mouth as well.
Well, we'll all have to work at it.
Kevin?
It's funny you say that about the names of the committees. The safety committee, I think in the French Revolution, there was a safety committee that put many people to death or something like that. So just, I forget, don't quote me, but.
You may not say that on town meeting floor. I'm just telling you now, no telling them that.
I will not say that.
That was a committee of public safety. I think you're okay. Yeah.
I'm glad you're getting this out of your system now, Kevin.
Thank you.
Appreciate that moment of levity about, yes, how safe it was in the French Revolution. David.
So I do have a sort of a substantive question about the joint committees or the joint, whatever. In the memo you sent us, Mary Ann, your third bullet point talks about how this, I think if I read it right, you're saying the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee will take kind of a lead role in the joint committees. Is that right? And if so, maybe we need to understand how you imagine that would, how people imagine that would play out.
So you know what? I think you're correct. And I think I probably misstated that. And I think we saw that, here's the thing, we saw that as a committee, right, where the three transportation committees would have the opportunity to weigh in, and we would also invite the public to that meeting so that they, first of all, can be educated and understand what the plan is. And then if they have any comments, that they would be able to do that. I almost wonder if we need to be more careful about how we want to say that, because I could almost see sort of a two-step process. One might be where one committee might lead a committee discussion, and then we might have transportation safety be responsible for running the public portion of it. You know, so thoughts. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, and if you compare the charge statement for the safety committee, they have that language includes sort of, if I read it right, it seems to be saying, second page of their document, the third bullet point, recommend to the other committee, the planning committee, it changes in the policies. I think that if I read that right, it means they would take the lead in dealing with the public, getting public input, and then reduce that down to some core principles that would be handed off to the planning committee, which is all fine. I mean, it sort of fits with how they've interacted with the public over the years with the way the TMAC has. I'm just not, I have a feeling that that's not quite consistent with the memo emphasis of our taking some sort of lead role. I think we need to be a player, a member at the table, but aren't necessarily, I think it sort of feels like if we're all three committees are reporting to the select board is taking the lead role still, isn't it?
Well,
ultimately.
So all three committees are advisory to the select board, right? So the select board does have the final call on what to take forward for changes, or to ultimately recommend if there is a change recommended. So,
but in terms of conducting and presiding at a joint meeting, would it not, or who would do that? Would it not be the select board?
So I guess I was thinking that the committees would decide probably who might chair the meeting. And generally speaking, I would think that we might have the mobility planning committee chair the meeting, working with DPW for the joint meeting. But it could make sense to me that that chair function would switch for the public comment portion of the meeting. Karis, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I can go in. I don't recall the language being this specific in the actual charges, but I think the two dates that were picked, the September date and the February date, were picked kind of strategically based on our capital planning process and our construction planning process. So the September date is really after we've gotten all of our data for our five-year capital plan, to work with the committees and provide that communication and getting feedback and guidance. I think there could be other agenda items at those meetings, but I think that's why the timing of that meeting was September. And then the meeting in February is usually when we're starting to get the better clarity on the upcoming year's plan for that particular construction season, and to help promote, get feedback and clarity on the work that we intend to do that following year. So I think those are the sort of the reasoning behind the two dates for the meetings. And then I think maybe the agenda may follow based on that context.
And do you have any thoughts about who would be most helpful to you in that moment to chair the meeting? Does it matter?
Almost wondering if the planning group, the policy group makes more sense focused in the September meeting, because that's really about sort of building that five-year capital plan. And because the traffic safety group deals with a lot of public interaction, might be very helpful in dealing with the winter meeting, because that's focused on like actual work that's going to impact people in the short term.
That makes sense to me. Other people, does that make sense? Leave anybody uncomfortable?
Well, if I might just sort of, I think we're okay. But going back to the point that we've talked about, this, the joint meetings, given that their primary express purpose is to, familiarize the public with stuff, really does not sound like the kind of place where any of the constituent committees are actually getting any work done.
Actually, I
to then just sort of say you're going to have two meetings and they're both going to consist of a Sun and Lumiere presentation to the public, you know, with a sort of hearing-like component to it, presumably. You know, I just don't necessarily sense the technical work getting done at those meetings. We don't have to answer this, but that's why it's good to have language in there that says there can be additional meetings.
So Duncan, I would say you're right. I don't see those meetings as meetings where the committees are doing their particular technical work, right? Yeah. But I think the committees are doing work for the town in providing a discussion of the topics that are raised and a prioritization of those. So I don't see them as just a public facing meeting. Right. I think we saw, I mean, frankly, those issues have currently just come to the select board, and I don't think anybody's paid attention. So I think we want to put it in a different place and give it different billing and give it its own, you know, notify me to people as a separate item, because right now it's buried in a list of 20 things that the select board is doing on a particular night. Somebody notices or they don't notice, or it may just be under the heading of DPW update, right? And they're, you know, and then they say, well, you never told me, right? So I do think that both for anybody who's involved with the transportation work and for members of the town, that there are actual real benefits to doing it. I don't view it as just a song and dance.
Okay, just like
that's not my intent.
Yeah.
And
I didn't think it was either. I'm just thinking in terms of potentially recruiting people. You're not going to go tell them it's 2 meetings a year.
No.
Okay.
You're not going to go tell them it's 2 meetings a year.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
But our intent was to be able to say, if you'll recall, part of the very specific discussion I had with Justin is that on those 2 meetings, those would be a month where he would not add other business. So it would take the place of a regularly scheduled meeting.
Yeah.
You know, so you tried to figure out how to plan your agenda so you weren't adding extra things, but you would think about doing the work differently to be able to create this opportunity.
Yeah.
Duncan, did you have another thing you wanted to add?
No, I was just tardy lowering my hand. Okay.
So Karis, I don't know if you had a chance to follow up or if you had already looked earlier to the question. You had thought that it was potentially the case that Chapter 90 funds might be able to be used for a mobility master plan. And you were going to check to see if that was possible.
So I did not get an answer back yet, but again, I believe it's possible. I'm just going to get some clarity on the specificity of what is in the master plan and whether or not, you know, I could see a scenario in which some things may be eligible and some more abstract things may not be. So I just probably need a little bit more clarity on what specifically we're looking for. So like we have a plan of road repavement that we have done that is clearly eligible. It's based on a pavement condition index. That's clear. We have something somewhat comparable for sidewalks, and that's very clear. I think if we're looking at trying to set forth some policies, so like we've talked about sidewalks on local roads, we're starting to get through school routes and the business areas. And so now we're going to be working our way into local roads. We have a lot of local roads all at the same level of depreciation for the sidewalk, but we don't necessarily have a policy that says we should be doing this road over this road. And so it's really difficult for us to figure out where to put our resources first, other than being sort of arbitrary about it. So if the master plan is developing that policy, I don't know if that would qualify. So that's what I just have to find the clarity on.
And similarly, if the master plan is trying to help us set some policies that around shared streets, how we think about how those fit onto roads, what our sort of default policy will be to try to support in our streets. You know, I don't know how that fits into it. Our chapter,
sorry. So Chapter 90 did fund the complete streets work that the town did, both in the master planning and then the design work for the first phase that we just did at Dedham, Warren, and Harris. So I would imagine if it's similar in nature to that sort of prioritization, that it would also qualify.
Okay, so that got me to, so I was interested in this because if in fact Chapter 90 funds can be a source of funding for this plan, that gives us a way to think about this plan and starting to get funding for it so we can be able to go start work on it. I think the next question for this group is, in the work that we did we see any towns that had master plans that were current and that we thought might have some merit and looking at as a base for considering what kind of elements should really be tasked in an RFP for a master plan for us? Do people have thoughts about that from other work that they've done? Because if we don't, that might be a follow-on project for some folks from this group. We might try to see what we can identify there, because I think having sort of a target of what we would like to get accomplished there would be important to have, and certainly the FinCom will ask us that question. All right.
I'm happy to help.
Okay. David or Duncan, I don't know if you know of any other towns that have done it from any of the other work that you've done, have done a plan recently. I know that we found a number that seemed like they were older, and
Yep.
A lot has changed. So
Yeah, I don't, there's not any that come to mind and say you really ought to do this. The difference that I think we found looking around was that, you know, the means that you know, the different municipalities have, you know, you can't really compare ourselves to a Brookline or a Newton or whatever that you know, has more resources at their disposal and a wider, but the trend seems to be to, you know, treat more and more subjects, you know, and that's, you know, it used to be just kind of the roads and the highways, and you know, maybe it gave a little bit of thought to transit, and now the non-motorized modes and all kinds of other aspects are, you know, are claiming due attention. And it's really easy to spend $1 million doing a super plan that, you know, talks to every stakeholder and makes them happy.
So I am actually not a fan of plans like that. I will just start
Yep.
by saying I'm far more a plan of something that says, you know, give me the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's an element of long-term vision, but give me the next 3 years. What do we have to
Yep.
do now? Because otherwise I worry that they get put on the shelf and you don't have sufficient actionable items
Yep.
coming out of it.
Well, that's the thing. I think we sort of moved towards, you know, quite possibly doing it in bits and pieces to a certain extent. And there's, you know, if now is the time to sort of get sidewalks, you know, done, and you know, work out, you know, replacement frequencies and you know, the condition thresholds and everything, then, you know, then maybe that's something we buckle down and do. And, you know, worrying about, you know, when it's appropriate to, you know, have parklets and sidewalk, extend restaurants into the street, you know, might be something else with a different priority.
So we're definitely going to have, you know, a focus on what should be happening around the common in how we think about the traffic in the common and around there. Probably coming sometime this spring, but I also think about elements of how do we get, you know, electric vehicle providing some transportation for us along the spine the town at some point. You know, we'll continue to work with what can we do with Newton to think about extending in that direction. So pieces that can make us ready for that will be important. One of the priorities that the select board is planning to bring is something like the NUMO option in Newton. So a local electric vehicle transportation option for the town that people can, you know, just call up and pay a couple of dollars and get a ride somewhere else in town. So I think there will be some work kind of around that, but maybe we need to sit down and kind of go through what some of the near-term things are and understand what the best practices are going to be there. David.
Yeah, I don't have Duncan's kind of regular access to what a lot of other places are doing, but it seems to me if you're focused not on trying to create a big comprehensive plan so much as what can we do in the next few years, that I would suggest that's a more manageable approach, and it would lend itself to regular reaching out to our neighboring towns as well. And it even though we don't have the same resources as Newton has, we might have shared interests on given subjects, and that would suggest, notwithstanding the disparity, we should work with them on the subjects that really matter to us. So I like what you're suggesting as our approach to that. I think the comprehensive plan approach is potentially just a sinkhole. The other little thing I'll just say is in the little experience I had attending some MAPC meetings years ago, that was really quite a good sharing common ground where planning officials from the different towns were able to say, well, we're undertaking this kind of a plan right now. Have you done this recently? And so I would say if we are contemplating any of those things, we might ask our MAPC people to raise those flags at those meetings.
That's a great idea, and see what they can learn.
Yeah.
Thank you. Keith.
Yeah, so I think I was tasked with researching Reading, and I know I found something, but I'm on a different machine right now, so I'm having trouble locating it. But I did just do a search, and North Reading came up. I'm not great at comparing towns. Needham's is better than every place, right? But they did seem to have something that was slated for what, 2020 to 2040. So that might be some place that we can look back into if you're looking for, a good starting point. I know Reading had something. I just can't recall. I can't find it right now, but I'd be happy to look more into it.
Maybe if you want to send that into Tyler, he can get it out to everybody and we can take a look at that.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Adam.
So I'm in Nova Scotia visiting my mother who's just recovering from surgery. So, and the time difference on this went in the opposite direction. So I apologize. I thought I was actually going to get ready for 8 o'clock. It's almost 8 o'clock here. I thought I was early for this thing. And I apologize. You're talking about, I think, some form of a master plan that can give us some tangible direction in the near term. One of the things that I did here that relates specifically to that is the town common. And just given the different perches, I guess, that I have between the CEA and the planning board, there does seem to be a bit of a competition for how the common is regarded. On the one hand, it's a transportation it's a throughput along a transportation corridor, both on Chestnut and Highland, and certainly Great Plain, which is one challenge. And yet, for the businesses in town, if it remains a throughfare, it does make the stop and shop far more difficult. And if there is more pedestrian friendly access to the downtown, it would improve the business condition. And at the very least, it will improve the sentiment of a lot of the small businesses in the tight radius within our town common. So I know that's only a micro issue within a bigger context, but when I heard that, I just wanted to mention that because it's something that I think we all want to consider, you know, how we move people through town efficiently, safely, and yet, you know, still utilize our patronize our businesses and the various amenities that we have in the downtown.
So I do think that when the downtown streetscape work started, probably almost a decade ago, I'm not sure it's that long, but it's probably getting close to that. Certainly the goal at the time was to provide as much throughput as possible through the town. And I think that goal has really changed and is being revisited, particularly with what happened during COVID and with the sense that we need to work better for different modes of transportation as well. Karis.
So I was going to ask, I think timing of this committee and the timing of the downtown and the timing of the mobility plan, I'm trying to have a heart, like I'm just trying to line it up and see, is this sort of all one sort of flow, or is really the downtown sort of separate from the committees and the mobility plan, just knowing the timing of it. Hoping that we'll have some clarity on the downtown when this parking study is finished, and then we can restart the process of designing it. I didn't know if you had any ideas, or if anyone else did, about when we think these new committees would be would start their work, and whether or not in starting their work it makes sense to tackle something like the downtown, or does the downtown sort of happen, you know, outside or in conjunction with these committees.
So let me ask this group how you feel about that. To some extent, technically, right, we can't start committees until we go to town meeting, right? We have an existing committee that we need to take out and get approval from town meeting to remove. We have these new charges. To some extent, the select board could just bring in and have a discussion and actually make a decision to approve the new charges and start the new committees. And we'd kind of have an appendage old committee hanging out there, but we wouldn't be doing anything with it, which is kind of where it has been for the last period anyway. What do you all think? I guess I'm inclined to think about starting fresh and just getting going. How that feeds into Karis's question. I mean, the parking study is going now, and then after the parking study, we're going to need to go back and re-look at the downtown common, the streetscape redesign, because the last version that we saw, we concluded it wasn't something that we were satisfied with, so that all those pieces come together. But it could certainly make sense that you know, the mobility planning committee could feed into that work. David.
So two things. One is I would appreciate it if it'd be possible to get either you or Kevin to possibly come and speak to the long-term serving members of the Transportation Committee and sort of help us put this in the context of what's happening and the changes here and why. Just as a sort of a courtesy. We haven't met in a long time. I could do it, but I think it would be really nice if one of you was able to join us too. And secondly, on the question of whether to involve the downtown stuff in the same timing stuff, I think I'm immediately wondering about the funding sourcing, and that I believe, if I'm right, that a lot of the funding for some of the downtown work was just dedicated state funding, 93A money, if that's right. And I just wonder if you assume that if I'm right about that money continues to go, or do I mean 90A or 90?
After 90.
90, say. But if that money is always allocated for the downtown work, and then it has a life of its own, and the policy committee is trying to influence what we do and what our priorities are, but we're not going to have much influence if that money is already allocated. The downtown work will be funded this way. I just wonder if that should always be a given, that money goes to that project, or, I mean, I see the issues as related, that if it has its own funding source, and then it's going to have a life of its own outside of this work. But if this work includes that questioning of how we allocate those funds, or even more, not, I think one could make a cogent argument for it would be appropriate to consider trying to spend more than just the Chapter 90 funds on a given downtown portion of the project because of scale. That you might say that working at 2 blocks at a time doesn't make sense. We should be working at least half a mile in order to get economies of scale. But those are just a few further thoughts.
So I don't, yes, there is an allocation of funds, but we've said we're not going to spend those funds in a way that we don't think is the right way to spend them. Okay, which is kind of what happened. Was we had funds available, we're now holding on to those funds while we're revisiting what the right use of those funds actually is. So I think your question about should you do more, that's a more challenging question. I think that's a discussion that could be had, but we are limited to the funds that we have, that we've saved up. And I think it's going to depend what we end up concluding we want to do there. So all those are interrelated, right? Until we understand one, we're not going to understand the rest of it. But good questions all. Kev, and I would also say I'm happy to come if we want to look at scheduling a meeting of the Transportation Committee. It seems like we should do that, and we should do it sometime fairly soon. To talk about the work that's gone on and how we're thinking that we'll be going forward.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Kevin.
Thanks, Marianne. The question was, if we start this, how soon do we start this, and how do we work it in? I'd say as soon as possible. I mean, not to rush it, but when we're ready. Say if Springtown meeting will dissolve transportation, but we shouldn't be contingent on that. And I think we allow the committees to start to knit into the roles and sort of slowly take on with the downtown one. Maybe they don't have a big role, but I think to just begin the legs underneath them anyways. And we just let them, but they'd be a great resource to sort of help, involve the public and get to a good design. So I think we can just let this float in and hope for the best.
We'll do more than hope for the best, but Karis.
So I'd sort of echo that, and that I think, the real impactful time to have the conversation about what we're doing is going to be when we get to that September meeting, because that's when we're going to really be discussing plans for the 5-year plan. And so it gives some time before then to really kind of discuss out maybe generating some ideas and some policy decisions as far as prioritization in particular goes, or even just when we do a project, like what are we even looking at as far as like what we want in our roadway. So it allows for some of those early conversations to have, or even, this whole conversation about new sidewalks, removing sidewalks, trying to get some clarity about what our targets and objectives are for that in preparation for September. I also just want to add, we're working on in Public Works setting up a public outreach meeting in February. It's sort of, I guess, preempting this concept of the joint transportation committee, maybe a little broader, talking cross-divisionally about all of Public Works, but I'm wondering if that's also a good opportunity to invite the committees in to start that conversation as transportation. To be frank, it's what most people focus on when we talk to the public, because it's what they see and experience. They don't talk so much about the water and the sewer side, because as long as their water and sewer are working, they don't really have much of an opinion about it compared to what they see in the road. So I just wanted to put that out there as well, that we were looking at planning something this February. So if it doesn't make sense to start that joint meeting, since all the work will just be beginning, it might be a good introductory opportunity to bring everyone together just to participate in that sort of DPW 101 that we're looking at doing.
So I had been going to ask you if you thought it would make sense for the groups to gather in February, but given that you're looking at that construct, I do think it would be helpful to invite the committees in to participate in that. And to, I also think it will, that going through that process will cause people to think about what some of the policy questions should be. So I think you're absolutely on target there. Adam.
So unless I missed something, is the plan currently to, at town meeting, dissolve the current transportation committee?
Correct.
And then if that's the case, I would think to amend it to replace it with the creation of, at the same meeting, with the mobility planning and coordination committee, which by then will have had.
But we're not going to be putting that in the bylaw.
That one's not in the bylaw, but the transportation safety committee would be in the bylaw. That would not be in the bylaw either. I apologize for asking this. I can't remember. There was a reason why the transportation committee was initially in the bylaw. And I can't remember what, I thought we were going to put one of them in the bylaw and keep the other. Was it flexibility? I don't remember the exact reason.
So my opinion would be, we have very few committees that are left in the bylaw. It's actually not a good place to specify committees and membership and charges, because those do evolve over time. And so the idea that you have to go back to town meeting to amend the charge for a committee is not really that helpful to as things seem to move faster and faster.
Right.
So I think the goal is really just to pull it out. I think when it was put there originally, that it had their roots in having been requested that we do this really, but to partner with the MBTA and to work with them. Am I wrong? That's sort of my sense, was that it sort of came at that level, but it goes back a very long time.
So being outside of the town meeting structure gives the ability to be more responsive for the quickly evolving needs of the town. So that makes sense. Would we want to still publicly, around the time of town meeting, create the support structure and form in some official way these two committees? It seems like that's logical.
I think what will happen is that the select board actually will talk about the work of this committee on the 20th of December.
Yes, I saw that.
And talk about initial recommendations that will come forward there as a prelude, so that we can start talking about why one of the warrant articles will be to remove the transportation committee as it is currently constituted from the bylaw. All right. So I think the real question is, we would have the capability to constitute the new committees sooner rather than later if we wish to. You know, certainly David's right. We do need to sit down with the existing transportation and have that discussion. And then we need to look at what it will mean to start to identify who the designees are for these committees, and see what that will take. David.
Thank you.
I have a gut feeling that the biggest sort of public change about all this will be the changes to the TMAC, to the traffic safety. That's a sort of a changing of their role. Obviously, the role of the transportation committee is changing significantly. It's going out of existence, but very few people in town will even notice. They haven't. The public impact of that will be minimal. And whereas TMAC is well known, and a lot of people come every month to it, and so I think there may need to be some. I don't know if the February event that you mentioned, Karis, is a time when that sort of a rollout of that change can be done as sort of a PR matter. This is part of what's going on. I don't think as many people will be concerned with the changes of the of closing down the transportation committee. I think it can wait till we are vigorously rolling out this idea of a planning committee that is doing this new thing, which I frankly am thrilled that we've gotten this far. I think it's really the right direction.
So I think that's a good point. So we will put some more thought into that and think about whether the February timeframe does represent an opportunity to talk about what that shift will be. And I do think for most people, right, we're trying to clarify the things that DPW can take advantage of, can take care of without even bringing to the committee, make them more effective as well. And make the committee's time more effective in focusing really on the challenges that are the next level. So, you know, those will be some shift, but I would think if they can get their problem solved sooner rather than later, that there are a number of people who will be happy about that. Any other thoughts? So we will be definitely making some tweaks to the charges based on the feedback from tonight before they go to the select board next week. You are all certainly welcome to come to that or attend by Zoom, and we'll pull you over if that's your preference rather than coming in person. I haven't looked at the overall agenda. I think we have a lot of things on our agenda for that night. So I don't know what the timing looks like yet. Hopefully we can get this on sooner rather than later, so there will be some element of predictability if you were to attend with what time you might be needing to be there. But if that's the case, then I do want to say thank you, and I will look forward to seeing you all in February when we get together, if I haven't seen you sooner. And David, we'll need to plan a time, hopefully in January, when we can gather the transportation committee together.
Great. And I just want to thank you too, Marian, because this has sort of been a dream of several people. I know Duncan and myself and probably others have really hoped for changes like this for years, and it's really wonderful to see it finally happening. Thank you. And for all your help, Karis and Kevin and everybody else.
And thank you to Tyler for keeping us going through all of this and carrying the flag while Karis was out as well. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
All right. Then good. I want to thank everybody for tonight. We'll give you the rest of tonight back. And we missed Justin, so I will send him a note and tell him that we missed him, but we will definitely talk to him again when he's back. I did have a note from him this morning and talked to him last week. So all good. And I know that he, I think, joins you, David, in being very excited about the changes that we're looking forward to. And I think they will definitely benefit the town. And that's the goal that we all share. So
great.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good night.
Night.
Thank you.